Summer 1940. Nazi Germany offers Britain a peace deal. But what if Churchill had accepted? What if Britain had surrendered and joined the Axis? The entire world would look completely different today. This actually almost happened. And if it did, you wouldn't be watching this video right now. By the end of this video, you're going to understand why Britain's surrender would have changed everything about World War II, why Europe would have become a Nazi continent, and why this scenario was closer to happening than most people realize. Let's go. So here's the situation in the summer of 1940. France just fell. The entire French military was defeated in just 6 weeks. The Nazis rolled through France like it wasn't even there. British soldiers barely escaped Dunkirk with their lives. The British Expeditionary Force lost almost all of their equipment, their tanks, their supplies. They came home alive but broken. And now Germany is on top of the world. Hitler is at the peak of his power. He controls France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Denmark, Norway. The Nazi regime is unstoppable. The Wehrmacht is the most powerful military force on earth. And now Hitler is looking across the English Channel at Britain. He's thinking about invading. But here's the thing. Hitler doesn't actually want to invade Britain. Invading is risky. It's expensive. It would cost him soldiers and resources. What he really wants is for Britain to just surrender, to accept that Germany has won, to make a peace deal, to stop fighting. So Hitler makes an offer. Through various diplomatic channels, he basically says, "Look, France is defeated. You're next. You have no hope of winning. Surrender now, accept German terms, and we can spare your people and your nation from complete destruction. Join the Axis. Accept Nazi dominance of Europe. And in return, Germany will leave the British Empire mostly intact. You can keep your colonies in India, in Africa, in Asia. You can keep your navy. You can have some autonomy. But Europe belongs to Germany now. And from a purely logical standpoint, the offer almost makes sense. Britain is completely alone. America hasn't entered the war yet. The Soviet Union is still allies with Germany. Britain has no friends, no allies, no hope of getting military support. France is defeated. The British military is exhausted. The people are terrified. The Luftwaffe is bombing London constantly. Thousands of British civilians are dying in the Blitz. This is where most of the British leadership starts to crack. Not all of them, but many. The military leaders, the politicians, some of the generals, they start thinking about surrender. They start thinking that maybe Churchill is crazy for wanting to keep fighting. Maybe they should negotiate. Maybe they should take Hitler's offer and just accept that Germany has won Europe. But Churchill refuses. He absolutely refuses. And this is the key moment in history. Churchill looks at his war cabinet and he basically says no. We're not surrendering. We're not negotiating. We're going to keep fighting. Even if we're alone. Even if it seems hopeless. We're going to keep fighting because surrender isn't an option. And this is genuinely one of the most important decisions in human history. Because if Churchill had said yes, if he had decided that surrender was better than continued fighting, everything changes. Everything. So let's imagine this alternate scenario. It's July 1940. Churchill loses the vote in the war cabinet. The British government decides to negotiate with Hitler. Peace talks begin. Britain and Germany sit down and work out a deal. The terms are harsh but survivable. Britain accepts German dominance of continental Europe. In return, Germany leaves the British Empire mostly intact. Britain keeps its colonies. Britain keeps its navy. Britain becomes a German satellite state, but not completely conquered. The deal is signed. Britain surrenders. The British people are shocked but relieved. The bombing stops. The war with Germany ends. Peace is achieved, at least for a while. Now, what happens next? Well, everything changes immediately. First, Hitler doesn't have to worry about the British Navy anymore. He doesn't have to worry about potential invasion from Britain. He doesn't have to waste resources on the Battle of Britain and bombing British cities. All of that effort and resources can be redirected. Where does it go? It goes to the Soviet Union. Hitler's real enemy is the Soviet Union. Communism. Bolshevism. That's what keeps him up at night. So in this alternate scenario, Operation Barbarossa happens earlier, maybe in spring of 1941 instead of June. And it's even more successful because Hitler hasn't been bled dry by the Battle of Britain. He's got fresh resources. He's got a fresh military. He's got the entire German war machine pointed at Russia. The Soviet Union is caught off guard. Stalin didn't expect an invasion so early with such overwhelming force. The German army sweeps through Soviet territory. Kiev falls. Moscow is surrounded. Leningrad falls. The Soviet Union is collapsing. By winter of 1941, maybe even earlier, the Soviet Union surrenders to Germany. The Red Army is destroyed. Russia becomes a German colony. Now think about what this means. Europe is completely under Nazi control, from the Atlantic Ocean all the way to the Ural Mountains. Completely. Not a single independent nation. Not a single challenge to German authority. The entire continent is one massive Nazi empire. And what about America? America is still neutral at this point. America has no reason to enter the war. Britain is at peace with Germany. France is already defeated. The Soviet Union is defeated. Japan is conquering Asia with no American resistance. What does America do? Does it fight alone against two totalitarian superpowers? Or does it negotiate? Does it surrender to? Most likely, America sees a world where the Axis powers control everything, and it decides to negotiate. America might carve out the Western Hemisphere as its own sphere of influence. But Europe, Asia, Africa, the Middle East, all of it becomes Axis territory. America becomes an isolated, neutral superpower surrounded by totalitarian enemies. But let's think even darker. What if America doesn't just negotiate? What if America, seeing the hopelessness of the situation, actually joins the Axis powers? What if Britain, Germany, Italy, and America all become one unified fascist world order? This is a nightmare scenario, but it's actually where this could have gone. And on the other side of the world, Japan is doing whatever it wants. Japan is conquering China. Japan is moving into Southeast Asia. Japan is taking all the colonial possessions in the Pacific. Australia is surrounded. India might fall to Japanese forces. The entire Eastern Hemisphere becomes a Japanese empire. The Holocaust continues unimpeded. 6 million Jews is just the beginning. Without any opposition, without any Allied forces liberating concentration camps, the Nazi genocide continues indefinitely. Tens of millions of people could die. Gypsies, disabled people, political prisoners, anyone the Nazis consider undesirable, they're all systematically murdered. For decades. Because there's no one to stop them. The technology goes in dark directions. The Nazis, with unlimited resources and no military opposition, develop weapons we can't even imagine. Rockets, jets, nuclear weapons. Germany is working on the atomic bomb too, and without the pressure of the war, they might actually develop it. A Nazi nuclear weapon. Imagine that. A fascist regime with nuclear capability and no one to challenge them. The culture of the entire world becomes Nazi culture. The ideology spreads everywhere. Democracy disappears. Freedom disappears. People who resist are eliminated. Education becomes Nazi propaganda. Religion is suppressed or transformed into Nazi ideology. The human mind itself becomes colonized by fascism. Future generations grow up knowing nothing but Nazi rule, Nazi ideology, Nazi control. The British Empire doesn't just disappear. It transforms. British colonies become Nazi colonies. The educated, the intelligent, the potential resistance leaders, they're all brought to Berlin for re-education or eliminated. The British people themselves, the ones who didn't follow Churchill into exile or resistance, they become second-class citizens in their own country. Their culture is suppressed. Their language is gradually replaced with German. Their history is erased. London becomes a Nazi city. Big Ben might be torn down and replaced with a massive Nazi monument. Westminster Abbey becomes a temple to Nazi ideology. The Thames runs through a city that looks completely different, completely Germanic, completely controlled. The British people who live there are no longer British. They're just subjects of the Reich, subjects of Hitler. And all of this goes on indefinitely because there's no one to stop it. No external force challenging Nazi power. No resistance that has any hope of success. The Nazis don't make mistakes like they did in the real war. They don't overextend themselves in Russia. They don't trigger American entry into the war. They just consolidate power and spread their ideology until the entire world is under their control. This is the world you live in if Churchill had surrendered in 1940. Now, you might be wondering, why didn't this happen? Why did Churchill refuse? And the answer is partly his personality. Churchill was stubborn. He was defiant. He genuinely believed that surrender was worse than any alternative. But it was also partly luck. It was partly the people around him who supported his position, and it was partly something else. It was partly the fact that Churchill believed in something bigger than himself. He believed in freedom. He believed in democracy. He believed that some things are worth fighting for even when the odds are completely against you. Even when surrender seems logical and reasonable. Even when everyone around you is telling you to quit. Churchill said no. Not because it was smart, but because it was right. And that decision, that one decision by one man in the summer of 1940, changed the course of human history. It saved democracy. It prevented a Nazi world empire. It gave the Soviet Union a fighting chance. It kept hope alive until America eventually entered the war. It saved millions of lives. Because without Britain's refusal to surrender, without that defiant British spirit that said we will never surrender, no matter what, the entire world would have gone dark. Democracy would have been extinguished. Freedom would have been eliminated. And 1,000 years of Nazi darkness would have descended on the human race. This is why historians talk about summer 1940 as the most important moment in World War II. Not D-Day, not the atomic bomb, not Russia defeating Germany. Summer 1940, the moment when Britain had the choice to surrender or keep fighting. The moment when one man's refusal to give up changed everything. So when you think about World War II, when you think about how it ended, remember that it almost went the other way. It almost went very, very wrong. And it only didn't because of one stubborn man who refused to accept defeat. Churchill saved the world. Not because he was a military genius. Not because he had some master plan. But because he refused to quit when quitting seemed like the only logical choice. And that's a lesson that goes way beyond World War II. That's a lesson about the power of human will. About the power of refusing to surrender even when the odds are impossible. About the power of one person's decision to change the course of history. Subscribe for more deep dives into moments that changed history.